Welcome everybody to this is Merup's launch event for our latest issue, New Gender Frontlines. It's great to be with our community and audience, and we're thankful for your support. Merup is a small nonprofit, and it runs on the support and comradeship of all of you in our audience and our community of readers. Thanks for spreading the word about what we're doing, for being here, for supporting our mission, and helping us keep the lights on when you can. If you're new to us, I'll be sharing some links in the chat to our newsletter, the issue we're going to talk about today, and other helpful areas of our website. On the program today, we're joined by one of the issue editors and three of the contributors to New Gender Frontlines. We're going to have a moderated discussion of several of the pieces in the issue for about 45 minutes, and then open things up for discussion and audience questions. With us today are Sabiha Allouche, who is a member of Merup's editorial committee and one of the lead editors of this issue. She's a senior lecturer at Exeter's Institute for the Arab and Islamic Studies, one of Merup's core partners, and we're very thankful to them for all they do for us. Following Sabiha, we will have Rahaf Aldoughli, a lecturer in Middle East and North African Studies at Lancaster University. Rahaf contributed a really powerful essay to this issue titled Syria's New Men, which reflects on her return to Syria after 14 years living abroad in the fall of Bashar al-Assad. After Rahaf, we'll turn to Paniz Musawi Natanzi, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Wolf Humanities Institute, and a visiting scholar as of next semester at Bern. That's right, Paniz, right? Yeah, got that. Good, great. We're so glad to have her essay in this issue, and it's a reflection on a recent documentary about Afghan workers in Iran, and the piece is titled Courts of Exclusion, Working Class Masculinity and Anti-Afghan Racism in Iran. And our last contributor, who I think is having a little bit of difficulty joining us, so we hope that she'll be able to join us in time, but I'll introduce her now, is Hala Shoman, a PhD researcher at Newcastle University, whose contribution to this issue, Israel's War on Reproduction in Gaza, chronicles the destruction of the basic conditions of human reproduction in Gaza since October 7th, 2023. We have a packed panel, and to kick things off, I'm going to turn to Sabiha Allouche. Sabiha, the starting point for thinking about this issue really was to take stock of the field of gender studies in the Middle East and try to understand some of the ways it is really urgent in this moment to pay attention to gender dynamics in the region wrought by war, genocide, and counter-revolutionary violence. We began, our journey in creating this issue by bringing together some of the progenitors of this field for a special roundtable, which you can read in the issue, and we'll link to in the chat. But tell us more about your approach to editing the issue and bringing these specific topics to the surface.
Thank you, Jim, for me, Merup colleague. Hello, everyone at the audience. So yeah, I mean, I was part of an editorial team. I'll be talking about it at some point, more about the work that we did, etc., etc. But really, I mean, my intervention is going to be more like a long acknowledgement, right, of everyone who contributed to this issue, but also why the issue was important, right? The question of why gender has always, still, and will always matter, right, to our understanding of the Middle East. And I want to put this question within a larger climate, right, that we're living in: apocalypse, genocide, death, destruction, but also thinking, right, so thinking more about the political economy of producing and disseminating, right, Merup as a non-profit, producing knowledge under these conditions, but also ultimately, I want to say rising from the ruins, right, of this destruction, because, this, when we insist on doing the work we do, despite everything, yeah. So I'm going to try to do justice to these few ideas. And I think, right, at the first glimpse, right? We think sometimes that we know what gender in the Middle East or about or in relation to the Middle East is, oftentimes, right, propelled by this tremendous, right, almost formidable media, military, industrial complex, which ultimately shapes, right, academic pursuits and knowledge productions about the Middle East. And we know oftentimes based on Orientalist stereotypes, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, we've come a long way there, right? But also when we thought about putting this issue together, these are production, let's say, a timeline that take months in the making. And of course, I have to bring in the 7th of October, right, 2023. I think 10 minutes after these events became the headlines, right, everywhere in the world, the first horrority, right, that everyone was made to reckon with was the alleged rape of women. And right, and this literally, this one allegation was almost sufficed, right, there and then to justify the slaughter, right, that Gaza was going to uh, suffer and continue to endure. And yeah, and I think, but also with it, right? So with the genocide, with the conflict, so thinking again with the work of feminist IR, feminists who have thought about geopolitics through a gender lens in our region, and but also thinking about the extension, right? The evolution of the field. It might have started with speaking back, right, to Western stereotypes, thinking, right, about gender and conflict, but also gender on a more micro level, right, intimate level as a society, as the social fabric of, the region, not only in the region, right, but everywhere in the world. And this is what the issue did, right? In many ways, it stayed faithful to the usual political economy approach that the MERIP adopts when, in its topics and its issues. And yeah, so we did, of course, that's the moment of genocide that was there. We wanted to bring it in, but there were also other dynamics, right? Other spaces, gendered, let's say, innovations, novelties, etc., happening that also had to be there. So it wasn't always easy to, like, as an editorial team, you're like, what do I prioritize? What do I not prioritize? But also, is there really something that's more right important than the other, etc., etc. But also talking about political economy, I also think it's important to very much insist on the actual political economy in which many of us were working. And here I want to talk about, well, the first thing I want to do is I want to thank our authors, because it was not an easy trajectory. Yeah, we are working under exceptionally debilitating times. In fact, let alone the genocide, right? Some of the authors that we originally contacted, some of them were still were dealing with wildfires. Some of them were still dealing with the aftermath of the earthquakes, the big earthquake in Turkey and Syria. In the sense that, right, these crises are never over; they always have an afterlife, and yeah, they impact us on the long term. And right, and that's a very gendered thing to think about, right? I mean, feminist gender scholars are and remain pioneers and contesting, right, this idea of before, after, right? Rather, they invite us to think on a continuum. So I genuinely believe, and I'm not exaggerating, that the labor of the authors were, I want to say, almost superhuman. And I think this also applies to a lot of the colleagues who work on issues about the Middle East, but also about gender in the Middle East. Because by training, right, we are trained to think right on the long term, right? The scholar slash activist slash journalist, I would say, in the case of Merrick, even, and life as we know it, a minimum threshold, right, of normalcy almost became absent, right? It disappeared overnight. And so, yeah, I really, really want to emphasize this. Many of our authors, some invited authors, didn't even get back to us. And I think rightly so. Yeah, I mean, he really trying to think in large terms. What does it mean to be solicited right at the time of genocide, to write a piece for merit, which for a lot of institutions, right, doesn't count as academic enough work, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, so there was really an amazing labor done there, starting by the colleagues on the editorial team. So that would be Professor Fida Adli and Dr. Hisham Salam, but also the brilliant people who work behind the scene. Merib, I want to shout out specifically for Katie and Maria. Of course, we have Coco, who helped us organize the roundtable. And of course, I want to again shout out and thank the brilliant, the pioneers, basically, right, of the fields of the gender in the Middle East. And I wanted to share here a little, yeah, a very little quick anecdote. Uh, yeah, I'm going to start wrapping up here. Um, um, I remember when I was 25, 24, I think 23, 3, I was 23, and I did this MA degree. It was in IR. It was a very, very conventional mainstream IR degree. I'm not going to say where. Uh, yeah, but anyway, while writing that the thesis for it, I came across a piece by Denise Candioti, and I was just like this meme, of the ooh, and I was like, oh my God, like we can write about Arab women in such a way, like it completely blew my mind. Who's Denise Candioti? Okay, I found out the SOAS and then yeah, the my story with gender literally began there and then. And I think I genuinely believe for a lot of um, readers, my students, colleagues, people who are not necessarily based in gender, many of us still get this feeling, right? Once we start seeing this connection between, gender, politics, state, society, the economy, and you're like, wow, gender really makes the world goes round. And I hope that, I think that we yet again succeeded in showing that in the issue. And yeah, just the final sentence, because I really want to also pinpoint the style, the open access content of Merib, despite the doom, right? Despite the gloom and the difficult times. I think recently we have seen that so-called unpaid labor works. It's important. Grassroots mobilizing is still important, right? We saw it in the convoy of thousands of cars who drove by themselves to Gaza. We saw it in the elections results from New York yesterday. And this is not, these are not corporations. These are not the big guys, right? This is very ordinary individuals doing this labor that we absolutely must do. So again, thank you for everyone who took on this responsibility on behalf of those who apologized, who couldn't do it for whatever reason, and for yeah, bringing the issue together. And I will stop here. Thank you. Thank you.
I thank you so much, Sabiha, and I co-sign everything you've said, and certainly have had my own mind-blowing moment with Denise Candioti's work. I think you're probably not alone. I'm sure most of us in this room have. And likewise, I mean, that Merup is a labor of love for all of us, and I think as long as we keep that labor up, we have a chance in this horrible, horrible world. So thank you for that, and thank you for the leadership that you've exhibited in putting this thing together. I'm going to get Rahaf up here. Hold on. Yeah, I'm managing the spotlight behind the scenes here. Hi, Rahaf. So to turn to your contribution here, I've said this before, but I really think your piece is emblematic of what we do best here at Merup, providing a field fresh perspective on an emerging issue that is nonetheless grounded in deep experience and rigorous research. So I really hope people read your piece, and we'll link to it in the chat if folks haven't already. And would like you to tell us a bit more about what you saw in Syria in the past few months that signaled either a continuity or rupture from your past experience. And we previewed this piece a little while ago, so if you could also tell us a little bit what your sense is of how things might have changed since we published the piece.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim, for having us and for facilitating this. And thank you, Sabiha. And I want also to thank Merb editorial team for their very kind of insightful editorship, Katya, Maria, and all of those behind the scenes. And thanks, James, for this question. Actually, I do remember when Sabiha commissioned me to write this piece, and I told her, like, wait for me for 10 days. I am going to Syria, and then I can let you know. And I went there, and believe me, for 3 days, full days, walking around the streets in Damascus, I thought, like, the very kind of this masculinity that pre-existed under Assad regime was the purpose behind me to do a PhD on masculinity in Syria. And it was a moment where the Syrian uprising started in 2011, and then I went into my PhD, and I thought, like, why people kill and die for the nation? What is the nation? Why the leader is like that? What's personality cult and how it intersects with masculinity? And when I visited Syria after the fall of Assad, it was completely different. The symbolic, the very kind of entrenched, perpetuated pathies, values, ethos, symbolism in the streets, even their colors have been destroyed and ridiculed. And I thought, like, now we are having no masculinity to my mind in the first 3 days. And then I started to feel like, no, there is a new form of masculinity. And that happened with the time where I have already completed 3 years of extensive field work on Syrian armed groups. So I collected more than 200 hours of interviews with Syrian fighters on borders between Syria and Turkey. And then these central commanders, fighters, file rank fighters, were revolutionary men. They have a different masculinity than the Ba'athist masculinity, but now they are not only shifting from fighters or revolutionaries, but they are turning into a new political rulers or active political actors. And that kind of turn or change or transformation has not, I haven't seen it as that is going smooth. Now, in terms of what's new in terms of masculinity, under the Ba'ath regime, we used to have a more of a very hegemonic, militarized, surrounded by the personality cult. And that goes into a very enforcing a certain educational system that is ideologized, but also very lacking the obvious or clear sectarian narratives in Syria. So under the Assad regime, we didn't see official state narratives or top-down narratives that enforce or emphasize Sunnism or any sect, but rather it kind of masks sex in all ways. But at the same time, of course, we know that Assad regime instrumentalized Alawites and also sometimes co-opted Sunni ulama. So they use different strategies. However, their type of masculinity, they have the hegemonic masculinity, the hierarchical one. Now, after 2011, we see from my research on masculinity during the Syrian conflict, we see emergence of traumatized masculinity, more of a vulnerable one, that more of a trauma active response to what's happening. And here where we see a militarized masculinity emerging, grievous masculinity emerging, and revolutionary one. Now, for that piece that I wrote for Merab, I think still the findings of that piece valid till now, but I am afraid that I can preview with a new form of masculinity emerging that I haven't seen before, that is very, very kind of very not only hyper masculinity, but more of a traumatized Sunni-centric pious one that wants recognition, power, and more of dominance. I think these different forms of masculinities are still not in a way that we cannot. In my previous years, I was able to, and of course, it's always we should avoid labeling or categorizations when we do masculinity studies or even feminist and gender studies. However, I think that was, I'm not talking about all forms of masculinity, but about Pantheist masculinity, we do have certain models that in order to get into the Pantheist system, closed system, you have to adapt to that model. Now we are in front of a very hyper model that is changing, pragmatic, sometimes is technocratic, pious, emotional, pious narratives. That's very different from the only militarized Pantheist ideological one. And I think why this is worrying, because I am not the type of person who was like with every kind of a new form of emergence, because our identities are multi-layered, intersectional, and we do respond to different events. Our response are subject to our positionality, background, and all of those different layers. However, I think this is studying or approaching masculinity from a multi-layered approach and from a multi-level, using multi-level analysis, such as how from the macro level, meso level, and the micro one, where you see how that, for example, we saw Trump's comments on the first meeting with Al-Shara. That is a macro level kind of enforcing masculinity or emasculating Syria by saying they have a strong leader, charismatic, strong, he has a path, I like him. So this is a very kind of legitimizing Ahmed al-Shara on what it's and here I remember an article, a very important article by Iris Young about masculinity protection, where some certain Western states call for masculinity protection for other smaller states like in the global South. So we saw that from the macro level. There's also the meso level, how these different new forms of masculinities intersect and also relate to each others and vie for power and dominance, even if they were from the revolutionary men. We see even more of factionalization and with a more surge of sectarian narratives. So, and also on the micro level, I think, and I want to finish here, or I don't know if I have more time, but there is an article that's forthcoming soon on an insecurity dialogue on masculinity in Syrian armed groups, and I think in that article I did try to capture the personal stories of these fighters, or what does masculinity mean to them. And also in another piece, I tried to grasp or capture the personal stories with Syrian fighters, like their grievances, their emotional loss, their traumas. I tried to give them agency and like more of a taking a care approach. and even in reconceptualizing how greed and material and economy intersects with traumas and personal loss and might contribute to shaping different or re-emergence of different or violent masculinities. So this is just the last what I want to talk about. I don't know if I have more time. Of course, if you want any questions about where are the women, it's a nation of men now in Syria. We have only one woman in the government. I don't want to start on that, but I think we have fascinating scholars, journalists, and activists working on women's rights in Syria, but very, very little on theorizing masculinity in Syria, where okay, Syria, new men. We need to understand how they are acting, behaving, reacting, and shaping their identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahaf. I mean, the piece is really, really rich, and I hope we get into discussing some of the issues you throw out there in the Q&A, after we're through. And for sure, I mean, on the macro level piece of looking for this like paternalistic figure to just take control and fix things. I mean, the West has been searching for that everywhere else in the world since time immemorial. And in so many ways, it's not a new story. All right, I'm going to get Paniz up here, and we're going to shift to her. There we go. Okay. Paniz, so for this issue, you revisited the 2016 documentary Overruled that focuses on Afghan migrant workers in Iran's tennis clubs. And this might sound like a niche topic, but as your piece details, these workers are performing many more roles than just ball boys. So tell us, how you think these laborers are shaping images of masculinity and why you thought it's a good moment to go back to this film.
Thank you very much for this great question, Jim, and for bringing us all together here today. Thank you, everyone online, for being here with us, to the wonderful team at Mereb for your much-needed political and intellectual work. Thank you, Sabiha John, for your thoughtful and materially situated introduction, and congratulations to you and the colleagues for your fantastic intellectual and editorial labor. And if I may, I'd like to also extend my gratitude to the brilliant editors Maria Hanoun and Katie Nathaniel. Maria is a historian and feminist thinker, also committed to generative research on Afghanistan, and I'm just really, really grateful for everyone's work and commitment for a generative discussion. I also want to say salam to Gularajan, who you can see on when you look at the Mereb site with the article, like you see on the right side the film poster, and the man on the poster is Gulara, one of the protagonists I'm going to talk about in more detail in a moment, and he is now in Afghanistan. I want to also say salam to my dear colleagues and friends, Farnos Jurabjian and Mohammad Reza, the sibling filmmakers of Eteraz Vared Nis, in English, Overruled. Farnos wrote me earlier that her internet in Tehran is so slow that she couldn't even open the Mereb website to read the contributions. So I would like to acknowledge that, which connects with what Sabiha the situatedness that Sabiha shared with us in the introduction. And I'm sending my love to everyone here, as well as those who cannot join us today here online. And I hope that you're all as well as one can be, given the ongoing televised annihilation of Gaza that we continue to witness, and the loss of life and homes from Iran to Palestine to Lebanon. And my deepest condolences to everyone affected. So my contribution was written and finalized before June 13th, 2025, and before the latest Israeli aggression on Iran. And I think it's important to point out that the piece captures a particular moment before that event. And I'm happy to continue to think together in the Q&A in more depth about what it means to read and think with this piece on Iran, Afghanistan, and the question of Palestine after June 13th, 2025. But in that particular moment before in which this peace was finalized, the Iranian government continued, as it did also in previous years, but that received less attention than the coercive returns and deportations from Pakistan, to deport and coercively return Afghans. And while Iran diverged from the European Union, the United Kingdom, and others on the question of Palestine, it maintained diplomatic relations and pursued coordinated policies on migration and deportation in relation to Afghanistan. In Iran, coercive returns and deportation predominantly, but not exclusively, affected working men from Afghanistan, categorized and treated politically and legally as Afghans. And I would like to emphasize that because obviously not everyone identifies as Afghan. So when I say Afghan, I really mean this political and legal categorization of people as such. The documentary film Etiraz Vared Nist, or Overruled, offers us a lens on working class masculinity, specifically of male masculinity, which is the masculinity of people assigned, right, the gender male at birth, among Afghan laborers in Iran, while also documenting their experiences of anti-Afghan racism in Iran, I argue in this contribution. Now, in popular representations, including Iranian cinema and media, men from Afghanistan are often depicted one-dimensionally, right, as construction workers, as domestic servants. And these cinematographic portrayals of these laborers on Tehran's tennis courts disrupts this figure of the kargar Afghani, the Afghani worker, a trope that naturalizes their status as laborers whose physical work exists to serve the state and employers in Iran. And the film deciphers what obstructs people such as Gulagha, that I mentioned earlier, and his peers from pursuing opportunities in tennis and other fields of work. And it does so by foregrounding the men's daily labor and the discrimination they face, but also shows their expertise and their passion for tennis. Though officially labeled as ball boys, their responsibilities span domestic work, cooking, cleaning, as well as maintaining and managing these tennis courts across the more wealthier neighborhoods in northern Tehran. So the film honors their work while very, very carefully curating a visual language that is not about demonizing all Iranians, nor is it about victimizing all Afghan workers, but rather it captures attention that the encounters between Iranian and Afghan men in the film, you know, they use it in order to lead our attention to power relations and the dreams and aspirations of working Afghan men who are caught in a legal scenario that is politically fueled by popular and systemic racism. So what I try to do in this piece is bridge the film's cinematographic engagement and as such like the representational engagement with Afghan labor to the broader material and discursive context of Afghan workers' lives in Iran. And to do so, I draw not only on the film, but also on like the historical, empirical, and historic formations. So for me, the tennis court functions as part of what I call work worlds, and as such teaches us a lot about the tennis court as a geographic and geopolitical site that invites us to rethink what masculinity can mean in a particular spatial and geographic formation. And also rather than defining what it invites us to think about. Apart from that, I think the film also allows us or invites us to reimagine how we come to know Afghanistan, you know, and political, economic, social, intimate, and aesthetic entanglements between Afghanistan and Iran. It reveals how Afghan labor, especially among the working class, many of whom Tehran is a home, remain excluded from full societal participation, although their physical labor has quite literally contributed to building urban landscapes in Iran and catering to Iranian households. And these are not exclusively, but of course dominantly Persians. So not only in the present, but throughout the recent history, and also I'm thinking here of, you know, the role of Afghan laborers during the Iran-Iraq war, which has not been vastly documented or engaged with. So the filmmakers intentionally center Tehran and these wealthy neighborhoods to foreground the micropolitics of labor aspiration and exclusion. And now, in recent historical time, the representation of masculinities and femininities in visual and popular culture, literature, and media on Afghanistan has served as a very productive site for representations of gender dynamics related to Afghanistan. But these have produced in the second half of the 20th century and in the early 21st century, in which we are now living, an extensive repository of sources, including literary texts, nonfiction, literature such as memoirs and biographies, poetry, film, photography, you name it, music videos, video games. And that offers a lot of material for the analysis of the imaginaries of the geographies of Afghanistan that transcend also state-imposed borders and constructions of masculinities. Do I have some more minutes? Yeah, okay, so in scholarship, when cis men and masculinities began to be perceived as gendered bodies in the late 2000s and the second decade of the 21st century, scholars of Afghanistan predominantly approached them similar to women through frames of analysis that fought with the political grammar of institution building and banalized counterinsurgency and intelligence anthropology. And I call this temporality within which men and masculinities began to be studied, especially in English-speaking academia, as genderbazi. The gender game, in a different piece of mine that came out in the journal Afghanistan, a special issue in November or December last year. So the ways in which Afghan men were rendered visible often depended on these English-speaking neoliberal frames that obscured how racial capitalism structured these men's lives and labor. So I'm happy to elaborate more on the context of Afghanistan in our Q&A. And so in recent months, and public debates in Iran public debate in Iran has intensified around the hashtag Ikhraj Afghani Mutalebe Milli Ast, which means the deportation of Afghanis is a national demand, right? And cultural workers, filmmakers, and journalists have been trying in Iran, in Persian, to grapple with this wave of xenophobia. So a central question that emerges is what makes Afghanistani people across generations so distinctively othered compared to Arabs, Baluchis, Azaris, and other ethnic groups perceived as part of the peykar, the body of the nation in Iran. I think it's really important to acknowledge the community-based efforts in Tehran and across Iran, but particularly centering in Tehran, to challenge discrimination collaboratively and to foster and facilitate space for conversation and dialogue. Gulagha and I have been in touch again since February, after many, I saw him was in autumn 2019, and he reached out when he saw that I was screening Overruled in Philadelphia during my fellowship at Penn as part of my, I was teaching a class on masculinities and politics and global perspective. And it was also open to the broader Penn community, but he saw it on social media and he reached out and was super supportive. And I'd invited the filmmakers also for a conversation. They were in Tehran also at that time. But then in April, Gulagha told me that he had to leave Iran. And this was when this whole coercive return situation unfolded for him as I was writing. So since then he has been, he was navigating with his family the bureaucratic nightmare and these perverting moments in which, for instance, he received a document called Mujawez Bazgasht, which means permission to return. And there was the question of what to do with his home, his belongings. And we've been thinking together about his, also ways to, continue work, find employment in Kabul now, where he has no affiliations or connections. So to come to the end, so for me, working with him has never been just about conducting an interview, writing an article, and moving on. It's a way of life. And Gulagha, who came to Iran as a teenager, built a life there and developed an expertise in tennis that would make him an excellent coach if it wasn't for discriminatory policies that deny him not only, you know, formal recognition and certificate, but also things like SIM cards, rental, being able to rent housing on his own, or moving beyond designated zones. And this is not something that authorities have been denying in Iran. You know, as the screening of the film in official places such as Bab Firdos and Tajish in 2019, where I was like moderating the film screening, shows. But there has been no willingness to change this situation. So I would like to end with a thought on the present. So what can people-centered approaches to gender, ethnic, and racial politics look like, ones that neither succumb to nativism nor reproduce Oriental frames of analysis that thrive with terms such as mullah regime or Iranian regime, right? But actually force us to think what it means to take to study the Iranian government and its carceral desires, right? Its wish to become part of the so-called international community in the present. How can scholars committed to anti-culturalist thinking address political violence in Afghanistan and Iran today without treating manly and Muslim masculinities as exceptional? And this means not succumbing to the seductive yet underwhelming explanation that misogyny and sexism and state-sanctioned forms of violence are traits of just long-bearded men. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Paniz, for that and for your piece. And I'll only add that, you know, the story that you tell about Gulag today really does feel like a truly transnational and global one at this point. And I would really also send folks to another article in this issue, Fulya Pinar's work on deportation as punishment from Turkey to the United States. I mean, these situations are becoming the sort of precarity that you describe in Golaga's story, especially, is becoming you know, a feature, not a bug of you know, authoritarian and illiberal regimes and across the world. So thank you for that. I'm sure we'll get into more of it in the discussion. I'm really glad to have Hala Shoman with us. Hala, thank you for being here. We're going to turn to your piece next. It is a painful one to read, especially if you're someone who has been around the struggles to conceive and bear children, even under normal situations. You know, imagining what that's been like in Gaza the past 20 months is absolutely horrifying. So I'd like to ask you to sketch out for our audience the challenges that Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza has laid in front of parents or those looking to conceive, and how you think this fits in the broader scheme of repression of Palestinians.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you everyone for having me, but also for all the support and help through working on this article until it was published. First of all, I started writing about reproductive or reproductive genocide at the end of August last year because of people in Gaza who reached out to me knowing that I'm activist in women's rights and now human rights more broadly due to the genocide internationally, focusing on that. And to write about the violations on reproduction and reproductive violence. And while going through their testimonies, everything that they've been through, I thought that what's happening is a genocidal violence, but in another way. So reproductive genocide as a strategy, equivalent to genocide in general, but not as a byproduct of it. So talking about it's very difficult because I myself from Gaza, I left Gaza a few days before the genocide had started, leaving everyone there, my family, husband, and also my friends and my community that I worked with for my life. And when I started witnessing everything people were going through, I felt the responsibility of documenting that and to be part of the evidence-based solidarity. So with answering your question, what's unfolding in Gaza is targeted destruction of ability of the community to reproduce, so against their reproductive capacities in whole. And this is part of the genocide definition that was also touched upon by the Human Rights Report in March 2025. And they said they concluded that Israel is committing reproductive, sexual, and gender-based violence against Palestinians in a systematic way. And they've done like this, they published that after more than 6 months of the community realizing that and me writing on it. So like the term that I work under is called reprocide, and it's the deliberate destruction or targeting of community reproductive capacity embedded within Israeli broader genocidal campaign to erase the Palestinians, mainly within the settler colonial thinking or goal of Israel. One of the most shocking examples that I talk about in the article is when the Israeli occupation army have bombed the Al-Basma fertility clinic in Gaza. And in that bombing, they have damaged more than 4,000 fertilized specimens, so embryos, and 1,000 eggs and sperms also. So we're talking about more than or about 5,000 potential lives that were targeted and destructed in this bombardment. And the doctor who founded this clinic have quoted that in a very profound way, saying that 5,000 lives in one shell. So 5,000 potential lives were wiped out in one shell, but also 5,000 families, couples who have done their best to be able to bring those children to the life. And they saved for years and made a lot of effort for that, where prevented this, not only as like the murder of those potential lives, but also forever, because the clinic itself was damaged. So Israel damaged the possibility of bringing other children using like fertility clinics and all of those things. So it had prevented the present, but also the possibility in the future. What's documented in this article or within the genocide is not only by the bombs or the murder or direct murder of people, but also by weaponizing of everything related to reproductive life, from bombing hospitals to bombing maternity wards to bombing homes to the blockade over Gaza that we had it for over 18 years, but it was intensified too much within the genocide to the level that anesthesia, antibiotics, milk formulas for babies are not allowed into Gaza. And because of the lack of anesthesia, many people, and specifically women, had to go through C-sections without anesthetics. And I don't know if you can imagine that, but it's cutting open 7 layers of their body to get into the baby, sometimes alive, sometimes dead, because of the severity of the situation. And also without antibiotics and without like vitamins and food, mortality increases, complications increases to the level that even like at the beginning of the genocide, so in the first few months in the genocide, it was documented that miscarriage rate have jumped 300% in Gaza. The attack on the health infrastructure or the health of the Palestinian reproductive health is part of this reprocidal violence, but another factor is like the attack on the infrastructure itself. And in the attack of the infrastructure, there is like the damage of homes, the bomb now dilator strategy. So they're bombing the infrastructure or like creating an environment where even the bomb, if it's stopped, the murder and killing of people will continue. And in one of the attacks of the health of women, I remember my friend Dana, who shared her story with me. She's 34, I think. And for 10 years, she tried with her husband to have a baby, but they were not able to do that. But before the genocide, both of them were so happy, celebrating being pregnant for the first time. And they were so worried of the baby. She wasn't moving a lot outside home because of the complications and everything. But when the genocide started, and after their area in Gaza was in siege by the Israeli occupation, they were forced to move to the south. And at the checkpoint, they were ordered by Israeli soldiers to squat. And she was telling them, I'm pregnant, I can't, I'm in the last months, I can't do that. And a female soldier forced her to squat multiple times, around 10 times, until the level that she fainted and bled. Her husband tried to help her, but he was also beaten by the soldiers. Her husband took her to the hospital, and she was able to deliver, but the child was in a very poor health. And after that, although she survived, her reproductive didn't, because doctors had to remove her uterus because she had postpartum bleeding. And she had it unstopped because Israel, as like they prevented anesthetics, antibiotics, and all of that, they also prevented the materials that should be stopping the bleeding. So she became infertile at the first pregnancy. And her baby was in a very poor health. So God knows if they survived or not, because after that time, I didn't hear anything from them. I just hope that they are alive. Also, with damage of infrastructure in Gaza, Israel have damaged more than 70% of all infrastructure in Gaza, 92% of homes. And this has like many complications and implications on the community, among them prevention of intimacy, because people need intimacy in general, but they need it also for the reproduction. The prevention of that with the overcrowding of people, but and also with the prevention of physical space for privacy is making reproduction also affected on a high level. Also, overcrowding and the attack on infrastructure is affecting reproductive health in other ways, because it affects health in general. Because of the overcrowding and attack on sanitation, attack on the whole community infrastructure, infectious diseases have increased to unimaginable level in Gaza. And because of that, many pregnant women who had just delivered, and also babies are most prone to get infectious diseases and have more complications than other people. So, for instance, a friend of mine, his name is Amir. They had like a 6-year-old baby. She was delivered within the genocide, and she lived only for 6 months, because after that, when they started to trying solid food for her, changing from milk to other stuff, they couldn't find anything but canned food, so she didn't have the chance to try other food. But then she had infectious disease, and they were caged at that time, so they had only one hospital to go there. And when they went, there were no ICU units available to be used, so they had to watch in silence their baby, 6-year-old baby, being murdered in front of them. And that happened with so many people. And it's not just the trauma of having a child murdered in front of you, not able to do anything for an easy problem, she had flu or something respiratory. But also the trauma of thinking of having other children to the world, to the genocidal world, where they have been living at, and they're still living at for more than 20 months right now. So that's affecting their choices to bring other children or to have children in general. The third factor, or the third strategy that I'm talking about in the article of Israeli attacks on reproductive health is sexual violence. And we've seen multiple reports, verified reports by the UN, by many experts, or testimonies of women and men and children talking about how they've been either raped by Israeli soldiers, sexually assaulted, or children who have been stripped naked in front of others, and they had to walk on the checkpoints, and some of them had to strip naked some other Palestinian men to humiliate both of them and traumatize all of them. And how is that affecting parents' ability to reproduce, but also affecting the victims themselves with carrying trauma and having PTS, or a chronic status of PTS, where they can't think of intimacy in any other way than traumatizing way or raping way, or this violent way, so affecting directly the intimacy and the reproduction. But also another factor it's in the sexual violence is that it's affecting women, men, but also children. And when it's affecting children, that make people or parents desire to have children very tricky, because they're thinking of the possibility of having their children kidnapped by the Israeli occupation, or being like sexually assaulted and such violent crimes against them. Talking about that, this is not a new thing. The genocidal violence or the sexual violence, the reproductive violence against the Palestinians is not a new phenomena. It has been there since Israeli colony have been created, since the colonial settler colonialism of Palestine started. And from that, I remember when I was 15 years old, when I was in Gaza, the first Israeli aggression over Gaza, I remembered after the end of it, Israeli soldiers started to print and distribute T-shirts that had a woman at a pregnant Palestinian woman at the crosshairs of fire, with a slogan saying, "One shot, two kills." So if they shot a pregnant woman, then they killed two people or two Palestinians at the same time. And how that resonated, like I remember how that resonated with the community, with mothers being so afraid of being visible in the community, specifically at aggressions, but also going back to the 1948 and Sabra Shatila massacres and other such times where pregnant women and the sexuality also were attacked or used or weaponized as a war crime weapon, as a war weapon against the Palestinians. So also, it's very important to realize that Israel is not like a normal country or a normal state. It's a state that's known for their outstanding records and reproduction. So Israel is among the outstanding countries in that, and in fertility and all of that. While they are like committing the reprocide. And one striking example that can people think of while they're thinking of that is at the beginning of the genocide, I told you some of the practices of reprocide that Israel have been committing. But at the beginning of genocide, Israel have, or Israeli courts have removed the barriers to retrieving sperms from dead Israeli soldiers. And that meant that their families can retrieve their sperms and have them reproduced, even if they were not married. So many of them were not actually married or have partners, but they were able to get that sperm and to reproduce from it. And this is for like a state or a colony that's committing reprocide against Palestinians. But at the same time, if we're talking about that very small example, they are denying that that like thing for the living Palestinian prisoners who are at the Israeli prisons, and they try sometimes to retrieve and smuggle sperms to be able to reproduce. And even when they're doing that and they like succeed very difficult experiences of doing that, Israel doesn't recognize those babies and they treat them as terrorists, and they don't give them any documents, and they treat that as illegal. So this is like the contrast between how Israel is dealing with the colonized people that they are colonizing and violating and committing reprocide against them and themselves, the Israeli Jewish population. Despite all of this, it's very important to remember that Palestinians have always known that those crimes, to eliminate them, are being committed by Israeli to eliminate them. And that's why I talk in the article about different approaches Palestinians, even inside Gaza, have taken in reproduction in that regard. Some people are still pro-natalist and they would like to have children. Specifically, a case I mentioned in the article of a man who had all of his family murdered, and he wanted to have children because he wanted to have someone in his life. And even if he was murdered, there would be like someone staying from that wiped off family. And other people were like becoming antinatalists, so they didn't want to bring other children to this like genocidal world where they are living in Gaza, and they were so afraid of bringing them and having them suffering in front of them or killed in front of them, or themselves to be murdered, and leaving those children as the other 39,000 orphan children in Gaza. So some people choose to be antinatalists. But other group is still pro-natalist, but they are just saying that this is not the right time to have children, and we're waiting for better times where we can, have safer environment to raise our children. And because like so many people are afraid of or concerned on the situation of reproduction and the ability to raise children in a good way, many of them have asked me to write about that as an activist, and to ask people to be very, very careful of making the choice to bring a child at this time. And when I say make a choice, I talk about agency, but we need also to remember that making a choice in a genocide is something not possible, because even if people wanted to to control and not to have children at this time, it's very difficult because Israel doesn't allow any pregnancy or controlling materials and tools into Gaza. So it's something very difficult to do, even if they thought about it. But we'll have to think at all the time that we as Palestinians, we're always under the threat of being eradicated. And for that reason, many people are thinking that, the Arabic slogan, Sumud Muqawama. So existence is resistance. So to exist is to resist. And this is the only way to prevent our annihilation by the Israeli occupation, specifically at this genocide. Thank you.
Hala, again, thank you so much for your piece and for your description here. I mean, it's nothing short of heroic to chronicle what you've chronicled over these last 20 months, and I'm really, I mean, to the extent that one can be proud to have published something this horrifying, I'm proud that and glad that you were able to have it with us and that we're able to share it with the world. Again, I send everyone to that piece. Somewhat advisedly, because as I said, it's quite painful, as you could probably tell. I am going to add the rest of our contributors here to the spotlight real quick. Hold on. I think I have everyone here. All right. We're going to move to the question and answer portion of our program here. We have about 20-25 minutes to answer some questions that might come in from the audience. I encourage people to write their questions into the chat or use the raise hand function, and we'll get you up here and unmute. We did get one question for Paniz in the chat, so I'll read that back, Paniz, and then we'll kind of go from there. So the question is about, would like some more information on the sources you've used in your study. So, did you have the chance to visit Iran, or specifically the border between Afghanistan and Iran, in order to study the relations between Iranians and Afghanis from this perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Sidri, for this question. My name is Musawi Natanzi. So Musawi from Natanz, but here, Nawazi I also like. So about the sources, and for this particular piece, I draw on extensive conversations and interviews, empirical insights with the filmmakers, and Golora is mentioned during my contribution. But I also consider how demographic anxiety is manifested online. So I do consider, for instance, a recent publication in Persian by a newspaper that hosted a roundtable to which they invited an Afghanistani cultural worker, an artist named Batul Akbari, who was in conversation with two Iranian men. And I look at the dynamics that unfold there, but I also consider Instagram archives such as Everyday Gulshar, or for instance, influencers who have been born and raised in Iran, but who are, first, second generation from Afghanistan. If you ask me about my broader research, my book project and my PhD, yes, for this particular contribution, I was not in Iran, okay, because I was the last year in the US, the last 3 years. But for my doctoral and research, and then I did my PhD from 2014 to 1920, and in that period, I lived between Kabul and Tehran. I was not allowed to be based in Kabul, so I traveled from Tehran to Afghanistan and then went every once in a while to London for teaching and stuff like that. And then from 2019 to 21, I was living in Afghanistan. And you importantly asked if I did research at the borders. I went once the ground way from Mashhad to Herat, but I did not research the border line itself for other reasons that I'm happy also to discuss further. But I do believe that, one thing that I'm trying to say in my work is you do not need to go to the border in order to understand how bordering regimes operate, right? And also as a racialized person who was born in Iran and raised in Germany, I don't need to be at the border. Like, the border travels with me, right? It travels in our passports, with the places where we were born, with our names, with the papers, depending if you have now the German passport or if you have refugee papers, and whatever documents you have, stamps, numbers. So I think this is how borders travel with us also beyond the lines that states draw, and invite us to think about how in our daily lives and encounters power dynamics between Iranian and Afghan men in particular play out. I hope this was helpful, but I'm happy to elaborate on this further if you like.
Thanks, Paniz. And again, Sabiha, please, since you raised your hand, go ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily related to Pani's response. So if you had something to say, please.
Oh no, I didn't have anything specific lined up other than just to remind people that they can raise their hand and ask questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, right, because I think, well, I mean, gender makes the world go round, as Cynthia Enloe said, and I quoted her earlier. But also, I think we all know here in the audience, right, that the events also that are happening right now in Iran are very important. And I'm only speaking about it in terms, what does it mean to have an editor with a team, having, your resources to put together an issue. And for example, now Merab is receiving a lot of commentary, right, by a lot of intersectional feminist Iranian scholars, right, who are questioning, right, or critique and really refusing, right, Netanyahu jumping on the bandwagon of diversity and using very indigenous, very Iranian, very Persian, right, feminist slogans in order to justify what's happening, the bombing, right? Again, it's more than bombing, right? The annihilation of the infrastructure of Iran. And yeah, I mean, this is not a gap per se, right? But we live in a world that moves, that's fluid. Because I'm also thinking that one of the important pieces that we wanted to add, but we couldn't add in our issue, was something specific to the anti-trans, a view on the anti-gender backlash, a specific view from the MENA. What distinguishes it from elsewhere? It's a global trend. Right? Is it an import from the West? Does it have, its own local context history? Of course, yes. How has it changed, right? Why now? Why is it happening despite, right, the very rich gender fluid histories and fluid sexualities in the region? Yeah, and of course, Merab is ongoing. I know that our issues tend to focus on topics, but just because we have one issue on gender, it's not the beginning, right, and the end of our talks of gender. And again, I think we will all agree together that the general approach, right, political economy approach of Merab, we do talk about gender in pretty much everything we write. even though it's not necessarily referred to as gender. So I just wanted to add this between parentheses because it's really important. Yeah.
No, I definitely appreciate that, and it's something I think that, you know, insofar as I'm around the editorial process for everything that we write, I can confirm, Sabiha, that you know, that if we're not asking about gender, we're not doing our work the way that we should. You know, and regardless of what topic we're covering. I don't have any other questions in the chat, but I thought I might take the liberty to ask one or two, if that's okay. Rahaf, if it's all right, I was struck by one of the points in your piece about the sort of male image that predominated under Assad and that changed with his fall and the rise of Hayat al-Tahrir Sham and Ashara, as, you know, a man with a face and a very distinct you know, iconography in, you know, really first Hafez al-Assad and then later Bashar, and then a masked man, right? As becoming a new kind of symbol. I mean, of course, there is the image of Shara, which cuts a very different sort of figure. But I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about, you know, how you understand like the masked man
Yeah, well,
in Syria today.
yeah, well, thank you very much for like for that particular kind of new thing in Syria. It took me like from having these kind of honest conversations in the streets with these security men who are masked, and then to go to central commanders and following on my recent, like, because I did these interviews before the fall of Assad and now they are in MOD, being the new state actors. I did ask them, and their response was a mix of intimidation and awe that they need to inflect and perpetuate with the fall of the regime, of the oldest regime. And there is something else that they need to make up for the lack of number of men in the security sector, because they only have loyalty to a certain men that the certain fighters that came from HTS. And that gives you how masculinity or certain kind of types of masculinity, the masked one, the invisible, that you don't know what's behind it. We do before in Syria, it's ironically, it was masculinity can manifest by the dialect. So if a police officer or a policeman was in the street and he was speaking the Qaf language, the Qaf dialect, which is sorry to say that it's the Alawite dialect on the coast, then you would know he is okay. He might be a security intelligence. He's gonna he has certain powers. Now masculinity and power manifested in these masks, and also culturally has become more and more endorsed in Syrian streets. And also another thing is that the mask became, there is another layer to the mask it's not only that these men are being using the mask to exert control and dominance, but also to make up for the lack of numbers of men. Actually, I wanted to have one more point, but it slipped my mind now. I will come back to it if I remember it. But it's something was about yeah. Let me remember it, and then I will come back if I have time.
All right. We'll give you that chance for sure. Yeah, I mean, I also ask because there's just this natural comparison being here in the United States that we end up making with ICE. I mean, it's one of the things that's been pointed out time and time again with the, you know, refugees and immigrants here who have been basically renditioned off the street almost universally by agents in masks, right, which we're not used to seeing. And I think your point about it being a kind of projection of a certain level of weakness is almost exactly how we're reading it here in the United States in so many ways. So I mean, I wonder, I mean, if it's surprising to me that they say that, they admit that in so many ways, right, themselves. Is it picked up on by other people you talk to about this, if I can ask?
Well, no, yes, of course it was picked up by many. Look, Damascenes people, like Syrians were very kind of, they didn't like the oh yeah, I remember the point. Let me just back to it. Also, masculinity manifested in the labels on the cars models. So if it says Idlib Tejrube, then it's something like, oh, it's coming from that government, from HTS areas in Idlib. So all of these are different forms and manifestations of how masculinity is interacting with different subjects and belief systems on the ground. Now, if, in terms of like, I think popularly speaking, Syrians are not kind of agreeing to this case of masking. Everyone is critical about it, and they keep saying like it's for security. I think I had to tease one central commander when he told me it's for this for their security, but I had to tease him on saying we do remember the Shabiha men were very, very kind of muscular and have that kind of certain bodybuilding, maybe because they came from different areas on the coast. So, and that question, and I told him like I see kind of a very it seems that they are young. I can see that from behind the face. And then he told me, you know what, this is something, a strategy that we use, because this central commander used to was he was part of an Islamist armed groups in the beginning of the Syrian revolution, Al-Jabha al-Islamiyya. So he said like, you know what, once we were trying to go and fight ISIS, and then my commander back then, he told me, you have a baby face, please hide it so you don't make us look silly in front of ISIS. So yeah. And then I took like, okay, yeah, now I take it, yeah.
Oh, wow. And funny about the thing about cars, because the other thing with ICE that we've noticed is changing license plates to obscure, that strange, horrible parallels really abound here, too much, unfortunately. Let's see. I want to give folks maybe one last chance to raise their hand and ask a question. We have a few minutes here. Yeah, okay, we have a question in the chat from Mikhail Rochat. Okay, yeah. So he's asking Hala, you spoke a bit about it, but he wants to know if the current or most recent events in the Middle East have changed your positionality regarding your research. You speak in the article a little bit about the struggle that you've kind of had to communicate or connect your research and your chronicling to some form of advice or some form of relation back to the people of Gaza who are struggling with this, parents and expected parents. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how your positionality has changed since you started chronicling all of this?
Thank you so much for the question. I think I had multiple positionalities and maybe personalities and identities within this research and even before it. Before the genocide, my PhD, I'm doing my PhD now at the end of it. So my PhD was my life project, and it was basically about women's rights. It was about Palestinian women at the intersection of colonial and patriarchal violence in Gaza. It was interventional study, so I mobilized community groups, women, men of all ages, and decision makers to combat domestic violence from a decolonial perspective. And we were working on it, working with the Legislative Council and multiple ministries in Gaza to change some laws regarding domestic violence, specifically laws related to military Israeli laws and criminal laws that are British mandate laws. So we were working on that, and then I traveled for the writing up. I was following up with my participants in Gaza, and so on to continue with the intervention. And then the genocide started, and you can imagine that everything has changed ever since. Infrastructure were damaged, people, participants, survivors, and victims domestic violence, but also the leaders and the like decision makers were either killed, kidnapped, have all of their families murdered, and now like they're lost everywhere. But the only thing that like kept is the contact between me and some of them, because it's something valuable. Sometimes was lost because they were either lost or because of the internet and connectivity issue Israel's is profoundly affecting Gaza with. But then like I totally changed as a person at the beginning of the genocide. Most of my activism was also found on my social media, so I removed it. I removed all my activism because I didn't want Israel to be able to connect me to my family, because I was focusing on something else, on ending the genocide. And anyone who's focusing on that is a target to Israel, and their families are also targets for Israel. So I changed totally my positionality, but not just my positionality. I wasn't also able to claim my other like identity, the previous one, because I wasn't able to connect victims with the service providers. There are no service providers in Gaza. They've been all prevented and damaged. And there was like I was hoping to prevent the murder of 1 or 2 women or girls like within a year, but in like few months, Israel was able to murder more than 10,000 women and girls. Now there are more than 28,000 women and girls. So not to mention that they killed more than 50,000 people in Gaza. So it felt like I'm doing nothing, and I had to be very aware of my positionality and my impact in the world. And the most important thing was to stop the genocide and stop the murder of everyone, so we can actually focus on other gendered dimensions of that. But while I was doing that, also people were reaching out to me, men, women, telling me about their experiences of losing their children, of having to, some men had to deliver their wives themselves because they were under siege from the Israeli tanks and all of those things. And they asked me to write about that. So the gendered lens of the genocide that ended up to be another strategy from my perspective and my theorization of genocide, which is reprocide, that's committed in parallel with the Israeli genocide of Gaza. So it's a very difficult experience, and I'm sure that many other changes and positionalities and identities will be coming out from those from this experience. But what I remind myself and remind everyone with at the end is that we need to keep working. We need to keep not just in solidarity, but keep action, so we have an end of this genocide and be able to help the people with everything that they're facing, because it's just beyond imagination.
Yeah, thank you, Hala. And I think it's a fantastic. I mean, the answer to this question is one that I'm sure is a complicated one for you, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. And I think we're all, at some level struggling to understand, what it is we can do, within our different positionalities to stop the genocide. I mean, it does not take. I mean, we are incredibly thankful for all of the chronicling you've been able to do. It shouldn't take this kind of chronicling to urge people to stop what we're doing, basically. Is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I really thank you for that. We are just about at time for our event today, so I'd like to thank each of you once again for joining us. Hala, Rahaf, Paniz, Sabiha, for your pieces. I urge everybody in the audience to go read their work. Read it. We love having these events, but it's set up so that you go read the work, because you get the fullest experience there. And also, I've put some links in the chat where you can read the full issue. There's a lot more in there than just what we've been able to talk about today. Please sign up for our newsletter to get the latest information and articles that we've published there. There's going to be lots of updates about the organization very, very soon. And if you have it in you to support what we're doing with a few dollars, a month or a one-time donation, I really urge you to do that. It's what helps us keep the lights on. We're a small organization at the end of the day. We do a lot with very little. So we're very, very thankful to your, for your support.